It'll also say no more to its Yongbyon nuclear facility. Now, all this if U.S. takes corresponding measures. Now, these are part of a nuclear or joint declaration signed between the leaders of South and North Korea. All this came on day 2 of a historic 3-day summit between South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The September 19th Moon-Kim Joint Declaration. Now, this is Arirang special broadcast brought to you from the 2018 Inter-Korean Summit Pyongyang Media Press Center in Seoul. I'm Kanyang Jennifer Moon. Now, so how will this accord affect future inter-Korean ties? But more importantly, these measures, these specific denuclearization measures, which some say are the very first taken or declared by North Korea, will these be enough to breathe new life into U.S.-North Korean ties? Now, here with me to rip apart this declaration is Harry Kazianis, Director of Defense Strategy Studies at the Institute of National Interest based in Washington, D.C. Harry, it's good to have you with us.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi.
Now, there were a lot riding on President Moon Jae-in's shoulders heading into this summit. We know that, especially because denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula is something that's been it's a long-riding thing. And of course, it's the very first time that such a topic has been on the agenda. What was your first impression of this joint declaration?
Well, you know, Jennifer, I think about sort of the name of our summit, Peace, a New Future. And I think we're moving towards that new future. I think sometimes we lose historical perspective. We're in the middle of these big summits and big gatherings. If you go back to the Cold War and you think about how summits were done, summits were slow building instruments moving towards bigger things. And if you think about it, this is now the 3rd summit between Kim Jong-un and President Moon. And I think we're slowly getting to bigger and bigger results. I think it was significant that Kim Jong-un did put forward the Yongbyon nuclear reactor if the United States took quote-unquote corresponding measures. Now, what does corresponding measures actually mean? Well, I think that's pretty easy. I think that's code for a peace declaration. And judging by Donald Trump's results on Twitter, I think it was very clear that he was watching this. I think he was watching it very carefully. I don't think there's any way that he had time to be briefed by Mike Pompeo or anybody in sort of the national security apparatus in Washington. So I think it's very clear that Trump is determined to drive this process. And I think so far, he likes what he saw that what occurred to in Pyongyang. So I think overall, I think this was a success.
Now, there are those who had anticipated some kind of a nuclear dossier or list of nuclear weapons to come out of North Korea, for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to declare that. Now, are you sorry to see that not happen here?
No, to be honest with you, I mean, would I have liked to have seen, you know, a nuclear dossier or, you know, Kim pledged to give up a nuclear weapon to the IAEA, you know, some sort of big symbolic thing from Kim? Would that have been nice? Sure. But I think we have to understand Kim Jong-un is a pretty shrewd negotiator. He's pretty smart. And I think for him, what he did, which is natural, is he did the minimum to keep the process going with the United States. That's okay. I mean, I'll use a football terminology from back home in the United States. He didn't score a touchdown, but he got a first down. And that's okay. The process continues on. Talks continue on. And I think what happens next is really key here. I think Donald Trump would love to have another summit with Kim Jong-un. I mean, that's already been stipulated. Sarah Huckabee Sanders already, you know, talked about that at one of her press conferences. And I think what happens here is Donald Trump having a lot of problems at home. I mean, he has a Supreme Court nominee that's in trouble. He has the midterm elections that are coming. I think for him, if he looks out on the political spectrum and looks out in global affairs, he probably looks to North Korea as some place where he could get a win. So I think for him, what he's probably thinking is he's happy with the talks that have occurred today. I think he wants to have that summit. And I think potentially in that summit, you could see Donald Trump offer some sort of peace declaration in exchange for a big concession from Kim, whether that's Yongbyon, a nuclear dossier. I mean, there's many ways that Kim could offer something substantial. But I think really that's where we're headed.
Right. So what you're saying is that this definitely did break that deadlock between U.S. and North Korea that's been in the works for weeks now or months after the Singapore summit. Now, we will revisit this denuclearization focus, but I want to go back to the inter-Korean agenda. Of course, denuclearization is a big focus for the entire world, and there's a lot of focus on the denuclearization agenda and the U.S.-North Korea relationship, but there has been a lot of progress on the inter-Korean front, even within this declaration as well. Were there any particular points that you would like to point out?
Yeah, I think there's just a very simple one, to be honest with you. You know, we're all so obsessed with nuclear weapons, with missiles, with the optics of what all those things are and what giving up all those things mean. But we have to remember here, diplomacy is a very slow, methodical process that takes months and years to build up to bigger things. And I think if you look at the history of inter-Korean relations, we had one summit in 2000, but then we had a multi-year gap where we had another one in 2007. And you know, the process has been very slow. But I think if you look over the last year, we've had now 3 inter-Korean summits, and we're potentially going to have a 4th one in Seoul here. I mean, that's historic. You know, sometimes we're looking so much for these big, massive signs, you know, whether it's Kim Jong-un making this big gesture. The gesture is we're talking. We're talking regularly. And if we're going to have problems in inter-Korean relations, if we're going to have problems between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, you need to have a relationship to fall back on. Because the thing that we can't have happen again is we can't go back to fire and fury. I think if anybody who's read the Bob Woodward book understands how close we were to being on the brink of nuclear war and all that means. Because if that had happened, we wouldn't be standing here today in this beautiful building. It wouldn't happen. So I think the most important thing that's happened for inter-Korean relations is there is inter-Korean relations. And that's a big step forward. Because if you're going to try and tackle the bigger issues, you need to have that foundational relationship. That's key.
Now, the South Korea's presidential Blue House, after the joint declaration was announced between the two leaders in the North Korean capital, said that this essentially means that the end of war has been declared. Now, would you agree with that?
I mean, I think they used the word de facto,
yes.
Which, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, my grandfather was in the Korean War. I think we all would agree, just as the sky is blue, there is not a Korean War that is happening anymore. But I think it's important that we have some sort of political declaration. I think it's important for Donald Trump, even Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, maybe the Secretary General of the United Nations, I think to all come together. I mean, you could do it in New York next week. I don't know if there's enough time to do that. But I think it's important that everybody gather. I think everybody recognize that the Korean War is over. And I think that would go a long way to making Kim Jong-un feel a little bit more secure that he can make bigger steps. Because I think we also have to remember, too, Kim Jong-un has a political constituency at home. It's very different than the one that's here in South Korea or Washington. But he has a political apparatchik around him that he needs to make happy. And if he's going to make bigger concessions in the future, he needs to take home his own win. So I think for him, it's important for him to get that declaration. Even if it's not codified in international law, it's a statement, and it's an important statement.
No, so what does this mean for the United States? Of course, like President Moon said from the get-go, he cannot have but bring up the U.S., constantly because, as far as denuclearization goes, it's really something between North Korea and the U.S. Obviously, right now is something between U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Now, what does this declaration mean for U.S. President Donald Trump? Obviously, he didn't waste any time. He was right back on Twitter. He was very, quote, excited. What does this mean for Donald Trump?
Well, I think we have to understand for a moment who Donald Trump is, because he's a very different American president that's ever came before him. And I think we make the mistake as journalists, think tankers, scholars, we try to implant other U.S. presidents on top of him. And it's a big mistake. You can't do that. Donald Trump is the social media president. That's who he is. optics matter for him. It matters how things looks, how things feel. And for him, I think he looks at this summit. I think he looks that there were tangible results. And I think for him, the most important thing is it gives him the political space to keep talking with Kim Jong-un and to make much more tougher compromises in the future. So I think for him, those are the important things. And I think it does allow space for them to be another summit, which I think where you will have bigger results.
Now, as for the future, obviously, there is a UN General Assembly happening. We know that South Korean President Moon Jae-in will be traveling to New York next week. As soon as he's back from Pyongyang, he'll be hitting the planes again, and he's meeting U.S. President Donald Trump on the 25th. Now, will he have more cards hidden underneath his sleeves or whatnot from Kim Jong-un to negotiate, to play the mediator role when he meets Donald Trump, do you think?
I think with all of these type of summits, I mean, they never tell us everything that happened, obviously. And I think Moon Jae-in is a pretty good poker player. And I think he understands that, yes, he needs to hold some things close to the chest to be able to bring to Donald Trump maybe additional concessions. Maybe Kim Jong-un made some other proposals that we don't know about today. And that makes sense. So I think Moon Jae-in is going to come to the United States. He's probably has some idea of maybe what a roadmap with Kim Jong-un might look like. But I think the thing here that everything hinges on is this peace declaration. I think this is something very important for Kim Jong-un. Remember, again, he has his own constituency at home. And if he is going to make bigger promises towards denuclearization, he needs to come back and bring something home to his own people. I mean, think of it this way, North Korea, really the only thing that it can produce or has produced is nuclear weapons. I mean, the North Korean economy is 1/3 the size of Ethiopia. So giving up nuclear weapons for them is a huge deal. It's codified in their constitution. It's a part of their identity. I mean, when they bring journalists to Pyongyang, they literally make cakes out of ICBMs. I mean, this is how important it is to them. So you're asking Kim Jong-un to give up something really big. So I think this is how things are going to work out, and that is sort of what the path forward looks like.
So let's put ourselves in Kim Jong-un's shoes. What are you thinking? If you're Kim Jong-un right now and you've just declared, or if you've just declared to give up the most precious asset of yours, let's say, what are you thinking?
I mean, I think if I'm Kim, I realize first and foremost that nuclear weapons, and no pun intended, are my trump card. I mean, they are the one thing that guarantees my survival. The North Koreans are very smart. They look to history. They're always analyzing the United States and what the United States has done in the past. And one of the things the North Koreans say very intently in all their statements, they're afraid of regime change. They're afraid of ending up like Muammar Gaddafi. That's why Kim Jong-un got very upset when John Bolton and others were comparing North Korea and talking about the quote-unquote Libya model. That's their ultimate fear. That's how they do not want to end up. So I think for Kim, all of these things are sort of in his head. And for him, I don't know if he's going to ultimately give up all of his nuclear weapons. I don't know that. But if he is prepared to at least put that card on the table, so to speak, he's going to want to get the maximum amount of concessions that he can. And I think for him, he's thinking about what the end game is of what that would look like. I don't think we're there yet to understand what that is, but I think for him, he understands if he's prepared to give this up, he needs to get the maximum back.
Now, when I read through the joint declaration, there are a few clauses or declaration statements on economic cooperation as well. There are clauses on Mount Kumgang. There are clauses on Kaesong Industrial Complex. Now, how does it tiptoe around the sanctions line?
I mean, this is really a big challenge for Moon Jae-in and ultimately Kim Jong-un. A lot of these different projects, and I won't pretend to know I know all the ins and outs of international sanctions law, but I think it's safe to say that a lot of these projects would probably be banned. So for Kim, I think these are carrots that Moon Jae-in and ultimately Donald Trump are putting to him. They're saying to him, Kim, if you are willing to take very firm steps toward denuclearization, North Korea's future could be much brighter. And I always go back to thinking about what the Trump administration did when they brought North Korean representatives to New York. They showed them the New York City skyline. I mean, when Donald Trump was in Singapore, apparently he showed him some sort of video of, what North Korea's future could look like. And I don't think it's any coincidence why they picked Singapore. I think they're trying to show Kim Jong-un what his future could look like. But the sanctions are a problem. But the only way the sanctions are going to get lifted is Kim needs to make major progress toward denuclearization. So it's a carrot, ultimately.
Now, also, are there any highlights of this summit, or are there any points of this summit that you found impressive thus far?
I mean, being somebody who's also involved in journalism as well, the optics of these things I always find very fascinating. I think two things really struck me. Kim Jong-un's body language. I know that's sort of like a weird thing, but when he was sort of strutting and walking down the tarmac to meet Moon Jae-in, he's very confident. He was very forward. He's swinging his arms. He seems like a very confident individual. He's very comfortable in these sort of big international spaces, in these summits. And I think that's good if he's really willing to make a deal. So he's very much sort of in control of his own destiny. So I think that's a very important thing. But I also think, too, some of the other photos and optics that came out of this. Think about where we were just a year ago. And it was a year ago that we were all studying how North Korea just detonated a hydrogen bomb, and we all thought we could be on the brink of war. Now we have Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un in the back of a Mercedes that's cut off, and they're waving to crowds in Pyongyang. I mean, you can't write that story. I mean, that is progress. I mean, do we have massive denuclearization by Kim Jong-un? No, we don't at the moment. But we do have the auspices of the two Koreas talking on levels that we haven't seen. That is progress.
Now, I want to step out of my moderator shoes a little bit and step into my journalist shoes. So, President Moon Jae-in said that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has agreed to visit Seoul. If all goes well, if nothing goes wrong, he'll be in Seoul before the year's over. Would you interpret that as perhaps U.S. President Donald Trump joining the duo and perhaps declaring the end of war in Seoul, the three of them at the presidential Blue House?
Let me take that a step further, Jennifer. Let me do it this way. What would be better is all that would be great. That would be amazing. But I think for Trump, if he was really thinking about that, he would do it before the midterm elections, because that would give him maximum political benefit. So say you do it maybe a week before the midterms, you'd have a situation where Donald Trump offers to end the Korean War. You could even have Xi Jinping come from Beijing if you want to bring China involved, have the UN Secretary General come to make it as codified in international law as possible. And yeah, you could have a peace declaration that ends the Korean War, and at the same time, North Korea makes some sort of concrete pledge to end their nuclear program, whether it's Yongbyon, handing over a nuclear dossier. I've heard it thrown around before where Kim would give over, 1 or 3 nuclear weapons to the IAEA. So there's lots of ways to do this, and I think it's all very possible.
Now, at this time, I'd like to toss it over to the floor and to all my fellow journalists and give them a chance to ask Harry Kazianis some questions. So if you have any questions for Director Kazianis, please raise your hand. A microphone will come to you, and please tell us your name and your affiliation, please. So if you have any questions, yes, gentleman over there. So if you can wait until a microphone is... Thank you.
German press agency. Very interesting that you said you have a very optimistic, I would say, analysis of the summit. And everything is going to be slow, but it's heading in the right direction. But the fact is, still, it's unclear how many nuclear weapons North Korea has, and it's still unclear whether they still are in the middle of producing and developing nuclear weapons, even if they destroy Yongbyon and other facilities. Would you give a time frame for that? Until when those things should be sought out between the US and North Korea?
Sure. No, I think it's a great question. I'm definitely optimistic considering how far we've come, but I think also I'm very realistic. I think when you look at the size, scope, and scale of North Korea's nuclear program, this is not Libya. This is a very mature nuclear weapons program, and it is going to take a long time if we're talking about a very thorough denuclearization. Because remember, we're not just talking about potentially as many as 65 nuclear warheads. We're talking at least multiple ICBMs. We're talking about the trucks that are on those ICBMs. We're talking about thousands of scientists, maybe tens of thousands of scientists, hundreds, maybe if not thousands of buildings related to the nuclear program. So this is going to be a very long-term process. But I think what's happening here that's very important that I think a lot of us are missing is that if you're going to go down that road, a very difficult road, where a lot of bad things could happen that could derail the whole process, you need to have some sort of political framework, but also a communications framework where there's relationships that are established so when you do have bumps in the road, you can fall back on those relationships. And I think for something like this, you need to have a firm foundation to move forward on denuclearization. I mean, I know a lot of pundits and other people who are very well versed in this space were hoping that Kim Jong-un would just hand over his nuclear program. Well, that's not rational. He's not going to do that. Nobody would do that. So I think for us, the most important things here is that a political process is being built. It's built up very slowly over time. And I think the eventual process and how this goes is I think there will be a summit between Trump and Kim, maybe a trilateral, maybe a quad with Xi Jinping. And there's set forward some sort of blueprint where everybody is held accountable to certain steps. Now, there's been a lot of challenges and problems when it comes to the sequence. Who goes first? Who makes the biggest concession? Well, there's a lot of ways to right that ship. I mean, the easiest one, there's simultaneous concessions. For example, Donald Trump offers to give a peace declaration, and at the same time as that peace declaration is signed, Kim Jong-un gives forward a full nuclear dossier. So there's ways to get around these problems, but at the end of the day, there is going to be some sort of leap forward required by everybody here. And I think that's slowly happening. But I think for all of us, we're all looking for this big sign where, Kim Jong-un makes this big, massive move. I think if you look at the Cold War and you look at history, I mean, go back to the early 1980s with the early meetings between Reagan and Gorbachev. I mean, you had the first summit in Geneva. You had another summit in Reykjavik. Especially Reykjavik, people looked at these summits as failures. They weren't failures because people were building relationships and leading to bigger things. And by the end of the 1980s, people were declaring the Cold War over. So I think we need to take the long view, but we also need to look back to our history if we're really going to figure out solutions to these problems.
All right. Do we have any other questions from other journalists from other parts of the world or this part of the world? No? Well, let me ask you this. I started off this broadcast saying that North Korea would give up this and that if the U.S. matches it with corresponding measures. I think it's a similar question, it's in line, but so how would President Moon go and convince the U.S. president or his aides that this is not a simultaneous one, or that, should the U.S. do this and that, North Korea is willing to give up its missile facilities or nuclear facility? What goes first, the sequencing of things?
I don't think Moon has to necessarily convince Donald Trump. I think the tweets today are evidence that he does want to have some sort of dialogue and some sort of ultimate agreement with Kim Jong-un. And I think here, what's happening in U.S. domestic politics matters quite a bit. I think Trump has a lot of problems domestically with, possible impeachment that he's looking at if he loses the midterms. His Supreme Court nominee's in trouble. So domestically, he has some problems. But there's one thing here we're forgetting about, the U.S.-China trade war, because this factors into this whole calculus quite a bit. Think of it this way. Do we think China is going to continue the maximum pressure campaign against North Korea if the United States and China are in a full-blown trade war? I'll answer that. The answer is no. So when you think about that, I'm sure Donald Trump is thinking about that, and he realizes most likely his leverage on Kim Jong-un is going to fade with time. If you factor in the midterms as well, I think you put all these things together, I think Trump is going to be a lot more able to and want to craft a deal with Kim, knowing that this is going to be the best time to do it for him.
Now, having read the declaration, having witnessed the third inter-Korean summit this year alone between President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, do you feel that all this is moving way too quickly?
No, to be honest with you, because a lot of times in history, things move quickly. I mean, if you think about, again, looking at historical context, I look to the Cold War a lot of times. The Cold War ended within the blink of an eye. You know, many decades of problems, decades of nuclear tensions, decades of potential war, just within a few years, the Cold War wrapped up very, very quickly. Nobody predicted it. So I think for us to make a judgment of, you know, this is moving too slowly, this is moving too fast, I mean, I can understand why. I think people are uncomfortable with those type of things because in our mindset, we get used to, you know, sort of boundaries and certain borders that, you know, this thing can't be possible, this thing is possible. History shows us it doesn't wait for anybody. It goes on its own time schedule. So I don't think there's any reason to be pessimistic or scared at the same time.
Well, so basically, you're very optimistic about this joint declaration. Do you have a final message for the rest of the world? Do you have a message for all those, you know, tuning in to our broadcast today on the declaration?
I think the declaration is a positive step forward. I think in the months and years to come, we will have bumps in the road. That's natural. I mean, when we're trying to solve a problem like North Korea's nuclear program, decades of tensions, there's going to be challenges. This is not going to be easy. Making peace is not easy. But I would just leave you with this one thought. One of the things that I do a lot in my job is I do a lot of wargaming. And one of the war games I did a few years ago actually sketched out what a North Korea-US nuclear war would look like. And it changed my opinion on a lot of these things. In that war game, 8 million people died. Los Angeles, Seattle, Seoul, Tokyo were basically turned to atomic ash. And I think when you think of the stakes of what we're looking at here and how close we came to the brink of disaster, this is something that we have to try. We have to pull out all the stops. It's important. Our children depend on this. So we have to try everything we can to move the ball forward. And I think we will have a good result. It's not going to be easy, but we have to do everything to try. That's what counts.
All right, Harry Kazianis, thank you so much for speaking with us today and breaking apart this joint accord that we got just hours ago. And we will see you again right here on this stage tomorrow morning, Thursday morning, and I will be making that information available for our Arirang TV viewers right now. So thank you very much, Harry Kazianis. And thank you to all our viewers on Arirang TV for watching, and we will see you right back here at 10:30 a.m. on Thursday with a whole range of panelists right here at the main press center at DDP, Dongdaemun Design Plaza in downtown Seoul for the 2018 Inter-Korean Summit Pyongyang in Seoul. I'm Moon Geon-young. Thank you so much for watching.
88.7 in Jeju City, 88.1 in Seogwipo City, and 101.9 megahertz in Daejeong area, which is in the Jeju Global Education City. And through the satellite radio Sirius XM, you can listen to us on channel 144 in the US as well.
Peace, a new future. Arirang.
hope lit up through connected lines. Things once unimaginable came true. And things long dreamt of, along with things that felt far-fetched, will become real one by one. An era of peace and prosperity, to make it not unfamiliar and to make it not difficult. We will work to make things happen together.
Good evening, I'm Daniel Che, bringing you the latest from Arirang TV's special coverage of the 2018 Inter-Korean Summit, Pyongyang. Things are progressing quickly on this third meeting between President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. This is day 2 of President Moon's trip to Pyongyang, and already 2 rounds of summit talks have been finalized, followed by their joint declaration announced earlier today. Throughout the newscast, we'll be bringing you more updates coming from up north and turn to our experts for their take on the developments. I'm joined in the studio by Dr. James Kim of the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Thank you for making time for us. And Arirang's Foreign Affairs correspondent, Lee Ji-won. Thank you for being here with us at this hour. It's great to have these two on my side, very trusty to turn to for various updates and detailed info, of course. We first begin by connecting to our Cheongwon correspondent, Hwang Ho-jun. Ho-jun, so we hear that President Moon and Kim Jong-un will visit Mount Baekdusan together tomorrow.
Well, Daniel, if we said before that there aren't that many factors that would surprise us reporters during the third Inter-Korean Summit this year, well, the Blue House spokesperson Kim Il-kyung's abrupt announcement this afternoon about President Moon's itinerary tomorrow was one of many that proved us wrong. Take a listen.
President Moon Jae-in and Chairman Kim Jong-un will visit Baekdusan Mountain together tomorrow. Chairman Kim suggested a visit, which President Moon accepted.
The announcement elicited probably the loudest exclamations from the reporters here at the Seoul Media Press Center. According to pool reports on the Q&A, the spokesperson had in Pyongyang soon after the announcement. The two leaders will head to the southern summit of Baekdusan via a cable car, and if weather permits, they will also head down to Cheonji, the crater lake on top of the mountain. The First Ladies, the South Korean delegation, and the pool reporters are also expected to accompany the two leaders, and they will all return back to Seoul from the Sanjeon Airport, the closest airport from the mountain. Now, just to refresh you, Mount Baekdusan is the highest mountain on the peninsula. It lies on the border of North Korea and China and holds great symbolic value to both South and North Koreans. Its name is even mentioned in the opening verse of the South Korean national anthem. However, due to the division, South Koreans have only been able to go up the mountain from the Chinese side of the border. Tomorrow's visit will be a dream come true for President Moon. I'll remind you, the South Korean president said to his North Korean counterpart in April during the first Inter-Korean Summit that he wishes to visit the mountain from the North Korean side and that he hopes Kim Jong-un would make this wish become a reality. He reiterated his dream of climbing the mountain as soon as he arrived in Pyongyang while still on the plane. Definitely, so there you go. That's something that we can definitely look forward to.
Right, Ho-jun. So let's now talk about the declaration that was signed between the two leaders. Of course, there were some exciting developments there. Senior Presidential Press Secretary Yoon Young-chan gave a recap of the agreement just a couple of hours ago.
Well, that's absolutely correct. He underscored that the Pyongyang Declaration talks about the denuclearization, improving inter-Korean relations, and also de-escalating military tensions. He stressed that Pyongyang expressed its willingness to destroy the Yongbyon nuclear site, calling it North Korea's practical determination for denuclearization that would end the era of war and open a new era of peace and co-prosperity. This was probably aimed at the U.S. government, which has raised concerns about North Korea's willingness to actually follow through the denuclearization process. The U.S. has demanded Pyongyang prove its commitment, such as providing a list of its nuclear facilities. North Korea, in return, demanded that an official declaration ending the Korean War must come first. The conflict led to the sudden cancellation of U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's planned visit to Pyongyang in August. Yoon said President Moon will brief his U.S. counterpart President Trump on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly next week on both the disclosed and confidential results. That is set to take place next Monday. And finally, regarding North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's promise to visit Seoul by the end of this year, Yoon was wary about jumping to any conclusion, such as an official declaration to end the Korean War then. But he said the fact of a North Korean leader physically visiting the South Korean capital holds great significance for inter-Korean relations and the security landscape of East Asia. Now, Yoon also confirmed again that President Moon is scheduled to watch the North Korea's mass game, the signature mass game called, quote, Brilliant Fatherland. And we can also expect a short speech from him, which will also likely be broadcasted live. Daniel?
All right, Ho-jun, thank you for those updates. We appreciate it. This was not on the initial schedule for President Moon Jae-in's trip to Pyongyang, but it's decided today he will be visiting Baekdusan Mountain with his North Korean counterpart tomorrow. Sabo Bin fills us in on the significance of this mountain.
Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un have decided to visit Baekdusan Mountain together tomorrow. During their April summit in Panmunjom, President Moon mentioned that he really wanted to visit Baekdusan Mountain and that he wants to visit the mountain and see its crater lake, Lake Cheonji, from the Korean side and not the Chinese side. He repeated his wish when he arrived in North Korea earlier this week. With a height of 2,744 meters, Baekdusan Mountain is the highest mountain on the Korean peninsula and northeast China. It's bordered by Hamgyongdo province in North Korea and Jilin province in northeast China. It's had several different names since ancient times. The modern Korean name Baekdusan Mountain, meaning Whitehead Mountain, was first recorded over 1,300 years ago. Around that time, it was also called Taebeksan Mountain, meaning Great White Mountain. Its crater lake at the top of the mountain, which is called Heaven Lake, or Lake Cheonji in Korean, is one of the highest crater lakes in the world. A lot of international visitors, including many South Korean visitors, climb the mountain from the Chinese side. It is also a very popular tourist destination for visitors to North Korea as well. In the Inter-Korean Summit Agreement in 2007, the South and North agreed to implement tours of Baekdusan Mountain and even establish a direct Baekdusan Mountain Seoul air route. 서보빈, Arirang News.
Right back here in the studio, I'm joined, of course, on my left, Foreign Affairs correspondent Lee Ji-won, who will be filling us in the details about the most recent visit to a very special venue by the First Lady, Kim Jong-suk.
Yes, Daniel. First Lady Kim Jong-suk went to Mangyongdae School Children's Palace. Now, that is one of the famous cultural institutions in North Korea. It's where children, students can learn music, foreign languages, taekwondo, and sports. Now, the footage you see now is of that palace, and that is the latest footage we received from North Korea. Well, we actually expected a North Korean First Lady Lee Seol-ju to be accompanying South Korean First Lady, but as you can see in the footage, Lee Seol-ju was not there together. And that is the Dean of the Institute, Rum Yun-hak, who is accompanying First Lady Kim Jong-suk around the institution.
Right, quite a big gesture on the part of this academy to have its dean make time on his schedule to be prepared for this whole event. I'm sure everyone in the academy, including the students and the lecturers, were definitely on their toes to be sure everything is 100% ready to provide a seamless program for the VIP.
So that is the gayagum, the Korean traditional string instrument. And later on, we can also see that Kim Jong-suk watched a performance, and Kim former first South Korean first couple Kim Dae-jung and Lee Hee-ho also watched a performance there, and that is the pool area.
Right.
And we also heard that other South Korean delegates joined them in their tour of this palace, including the Chaemun-sun Gangwon-do province governor, Park Won-sun's Seoul mayor, Lee Jae-yong, Samsung Electronics vice chairman, and other business leaders.
All right, this is the latest footage coming from North Korea. That's why we are focusing on that right now. Of course, many of the attention of the world has been somewhat focused on the agreement that's been reached between the two leaders at this point. And I believe, Dr. James Kim, that the response has been somewhat substantive yet limited denuclearization steps taken according to the agreements. What's your take on that?
Well, there are two things I think that's very unique about this agreement. First thing is that there's some very specific facilities that have been named in this particular agreement, namely the Tongchang-ri missile facility, the missile development or testing
missile
facility.
engine testing facility.
Right, and the Yongbyon nuclear facility. They've both been talked about. Now, it's important to realize that the Tongchang-ri facility doesn't directly relate to the nuclear program per se. It's a missile development facility. So some people are asking whether the North Koreans are simply making the nuclear issue more complicated and more multi-layered. In essence, a lot of people refer to this as the salami tactic, to make other issues seem as though they're making concessions on the nuclear front when they really are not. And they're asking the United States to make counter concessions to the moves that they are making. So the question here is, is North Korea really being forthcoming about the denuclearization issue? So some of the critics are asking that. But on the other hand, ICBM threat is one of the central concerns of this administration in Washington. And it is, when you couple that with a nuclear North Korea, it makes for a very, very dangerous threat to continental United States. So I don't know whether this can be construed as necessarily not related to a nuclear issue or not. So there's some gray area here that could be up for debate. But I think that if we were to specifically talk about denuclearization as an issue in and of itself, Tongchang-ri maybe shouldn't have been included in that. Now, on the issue of Yongbyon facility and the dismantlement of the Yongbyon facility, that's in Article 5 of this joint statement, which is the last article here, mind you. It's the second section, the second line within the last article, where it's stated that there's a condition, provided that the United States takes
corresponding measures. That's
right, corresponding measures in line with the Singapore Declaration. The spirit of the Singapore Declaration, that they will consider the possibility of dismantling the Yongbyon facility. Again, a lot of ifs and with a lot of conditions, but there's a real specific promise that is being signaled here by North Korea. On the one hand, you could say that's a development. It's more substantial than what we had before. On the other hand, you could say that this is not really a development. So again, up for some interpretation and debate.
Right, the willingness to continue taking additional steps, but of course there are some fine prints there, as in the U.S. Remember what we talked about in Singapore. Let's go back to the spirit of the talks back then and perhaps sit down for another round. That seems to be the message coming from North Korea. Well, we have another expert standing by via Skype, but we'll turn to her right now. Let's connect to Dr. Hu Chiu-ping, Senior Lecturer in Strategic Studies and International Relations at the National University of Malaysia. It's great to have you with us, Dr. Hu.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the statement made by the two leaders will be under heavy scrutiny, with some experts citing a lack of specific details and concrete measures after their maiden summit and the meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. What kind of agreement were you hoping to see, and how would you rate the outcome we have today?
I think in comparison to the April Panmunjom declaration and also from the June US DPRK summit, the Pyongyang declaration is actually quite substantive in comparison. Of course, the spectators would expect more, especially in regards to how much North Korea is willing to comply with the denuclearization demand. And from the articles that we have been reviewing, it seems to be that the steps of denuclearization would be on the North Koreans' sides of demands, and that would be more about hoping for concession from the U.S. side rather than from the North Korean side.
Right. It seems like North Korea is trying to dictate the tempo, is what you're implying. Well, Doctor, denuclearization and reducing military tensions were some of the core agendas for the summit. What do you think of the results on these fronts?
I think steps to leading to the peace treaty is what North Korea is hoping for, and that South Korea, led by the President Moon Jae-in, is trying to make that a reality. So given that the Korean is presented a united front, so the ball is now in the U.S. court to finally take some concrete action. And that they know President Trump is keen to realize the June declaration, but probably not the U.S. State Department and also other interest groups in the U.S.
Also, Doctor, we're curious to hear what you made of the summit as a whole compared to the previous inter-Korean summits held in Pyongyang in 2000 and 2007. Was it just a facade, as some critics claim, or do you think it was a genuine step in the right direction?
I believe that from the South Korean side, the intention is of course always sincere, but from the North Korean side is to trying to use the inter-Korean summit to provoke some reaction from the U.S. side to test the U.S. Sincerity in going forward on the inter-Korean peace process. And that if U.S. can show some commitment to that, only then the North Korea would consider really taking a step-by-step denuclearization.
Well, it was President Moon Jae-in's aim to mediate and accelerate dialogue. And of course, we've talked about many things, and he was trying. Do you think the summit will advance denuclearization talks? Will we see a second U.S.-North Korea summit before the year is up?
I think that is pretty much in the discussion between Chairman Kim Jong-un and also President Moon Jae-in. Most likely that will be taking place next year, if not by the end of this year.
Okay, Dr. Hu Chiu-ping, Senior Lecturer in Strategic Studies and International Relations at the National University of Malaysia. Thank you so much for making time for us and sharing with us your insights.
Thank you.
Right, back to you, Dr. James Kim. Like what we were discussing about, how different is this attitude compared to North Korea in the previous sessions?
I think North Korea has been fairly consistent in expressing its desire to engage both South Korea and the United States. And they've not changed that since they've made that declaration at the beginning of this year. So all in all, I think it's fairly consistent. The approach also is as we expected, that on the denuclearization front, they will move very carefully and very slowly. There's some skepticism whether they would even be willing to move at all on that issue. So again, there isn't really much of a change here. Where we see the big changes and shifts is on the part of the United States. Recall that it was President Trump that canceled Secretary Pompeo's trip to North Korea last month via tweet. Again, that's another surprise. Recall also right before the Singapore summit, he issued an announcement with a letter that said that he's canceling the talks, and then that was back on again. So where we see the shifts and swings, we see mostly coming from Washington. And North Korea has been fairly consistent in their approach to all of this.
So with their consistency, do you think they're winning some support from the rest of the world as opposed to the international community seeing them as a very difficult menace to deal with in the past?
Well, I think that the world appreciates the fact that the tensions are down and we're no longer at the place that we were pre-January of this year. Again, that has to do with North Korea's change in its approach by ending all provocations since late last year and declaring that they now want to engage. You know, it's very difficult to say because it takes two to dance, and United States have to want to play along with this. If they don't, then we could be in a very difficult position like we were last year.
Right, restarting talks with the U.S. seems to be a main focus. The media around the world was expecting that President Moon Jae-in's shoulder is heavy with the responsibility of igniting the talks again. Do you think North Korea was focused on that same goal as well, even before the summit began?
I think that desire was definitely there. I think they're showing that here with this agreement. The wording in the agreement is a bit more specific. And as Dr. Hu alluded to earlier in the discussion, the ball seems to be now on the U.S. court. And the question is whether the summit will take place between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump before the end of this year. And if so, what will come out of that meeting?
What about Washington's continued demand for a list of inventory or nuclear arsenal and inspections to verify such inventory?
So U.S. has intel on the North Korean nuclear program, but it is a limited intel. And so the reason why they're asking for this information is twofold. First, the United States wants to learn more about North Korean nuclear program. So the question here is, will North Korea be able to provide any information that the U.S. does not have on its nuclear program, number one. Number two, as I've said before, U.S. has some information and intelligence on the nuclear program. If North Korea is really genuine about bargaining in good faith with the United States on this issue, then they should be forthcoming about all the information that the United States has. So this is a test. It's a way to test North Korea's seriousness and at the same time for the United States to be able to obtain some additional information about the program it does not know of. And it's part of the reason why they've set it up this way. Now, it seems North Korea doesn't want to play along with this game. And they've sort of turned to their own approach to this issue and the way that they want to move ahead. It'll be interesting to see how President Trump responds, but he's already responded with a tweet, right, and it seems very positive. The question is, you know, and we've seen these kinds of moves before, and the meetings happen. The question is whether we see actual action on the ground at the working level, and we see forward movement there.
Well, the previous summit between the leaders of Washington and Pyongyang, they did not really draw a positive response. It seemed like a very superficial meet and greet without any substance. So there must be a lot of pressure on the part of President Donald Trump to deliver something the next time they meet.
I think the pressure is mostly on, at the moment, also on Donald Trump, but everybody here. Less so on Kim Jong-un, definitely on President Moon's part, because there's more at stake for him. But it'll be interesting to see what they come up with at the next meeting. But President Trump seems to take a sort of an approach here that says, well, you know, we're moving forward in his view in substantive way on denuclearization, and he hasn't gone back to the fire and fury rhetoric that he was on last year. So these are all hopeful signs. Even though at the working level things aren't going as smoothly, the rhetoric and the military posturing is not there. So we're in a much better place in terms of when we're talking about and thinking about tensions on the peninsula. This is a lot better than where we were last year.
We're going to go back to some of the joint projects that left a bad taste in some business communities' mind, the Kaesong Industrial Park and, of course, the Mount Kumgang tour they're thinking about resuming, reopening it. And of course, the highlight there in bold would be as soon as conditions are met. What are your prospects for these ventures regaining the trust of the people and the business investors?
Well, first and foremost, the sanctions have to be lifted. If not, you have to have some exceptions to the existing sanctions arrangement for these programs to proceed in a meaningful way. It could be that the United States could work out some kind of a deal with North Korea with certain timelines and in terms of how they're going to stage the reduction of sanctions on these fronts. But again, without any movement on sanctions, it's difficult for me to see how these programs will resume, because there has to be some kind of financial transaction that follows through with reopening of Kaesong and Mount Kumgang. And that means that banks will be involved. And if these banks are doing business in the United States, they are vulnerable to sanctions pressure. And so if there's some other way to do this without involving the banks, then there could be a solution. But it's difficult for me to see how that would be possible.
Right, one very visible stumbling block there, sanctions, not just regaining the trust of people who had these projects put on pause because of inter-Korean relations. Now, going back to, speaking of inter-Korean relations, Jiwon, going back to some of the details of the programs that we've had up to this day and what we can expect in the near coming hours, I believe there's a dinner that's probably going on right now.
Yes, Daniel, we believe the South Korean first couple is having their dinner with the North Korean leader. And it's, from what we heard earlier in the day, it is at the Taedonggang seafood restaurant. It was built just 2 months ago, and it's a local restaurant, but it's one of the high quality ones. It was named and inspected directly by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un himself. He said he wants this restaurant to be another symbolic restaurant that represents Pyongyang like the Ongyugan does. And that is the footage of Ongyugan. It's where the two Korean leaders had their lunch today. And so, to tell you more about this Taedonggang seafood restaurant where they are currently likely to be having their dinner, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un said that restaurant is another one where North Korean workers can provide a chance for locals to enjoy international food and also taste the taste buds of foreign visitors to the country as well. And we believe that this restaurant was chosen for one of the reasons, for South Korean Moon Jae-in's routine of going to these local restaurants when he goes to state visits outside of the country. He also went to a local restaurant back when he was visiting China.
Right, Ongyugan, of course, is a name that's been very familiar with South Koreans because of the fact that they had a chef and a noodle-making machine delivered to the site of the first summit between the two leaders, and it just underlines how much President Moon Jae-in loves naengmyeon, the Korean cold noodle dish. Yes. And we won't be surprised if they hold another meal there before he departs Pyongyang.
It was actually called a naengmyeon diplomacy, yes, because the two leaders having naengmyeon at the Panmunjom summit was a big surprise to many. And so a lot of South Koreans, I believe, went to have naengmyeon for dinner that day,
And we're getting some more recent footage from Ongyugan. I'm sure this venue has been covered extensively in various PR footages, but this time this one is focused on the most recent one where the two leaders are sitting down with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un not wearing glasses this time, interestingly, to have a closer look and an eye-to-eye contact with South Korean counterpart Moon Jae-in there. Also interesting development is that there were a lot of talks about will it be too risky to take part as an audience in the mass games. What's your take on that, Dr. James Kim? It's seen originally as a form of propaganda with a lot of aggressive rhetoric towards the outside world in the past. Of course, there were some recent changes made.
With North Korea, it's difficult to avoid any kind of rhetoric with propaganda. I think anything involving North Korea and any cultural events That's something that comes par for the course, and you have to take it as part of the package. There's discussions not only for the mass games, but moving on, other kinds of cultural exchanges, especially on the sporting side, right? The 2020 Summer Games, for instance. And I think these kinds of sports diplomacy overall is one way to break the ice at the people-to-people level. And this goes beyond simply interactions at the elite level between two governments, because all the changes that really matter happen at the ground level, at the level of the regular people. And so, you know, it's kind of surprising to me that we would have the kind of expansive people-to-people interaction and cultural exchanges and sporting exchanges than what we've seen in the past. We've had some in the past, but if we're thinking about deepening it and broadening it, I would be very surprised in some ways, because this cultural and ideological threats to the regime's ideology would be a concern for the North Korean regime. And if they're making changes there on that front, it seems to show some progress in thinking.
Willingness to embrace something from the outside, not afraid of shedding some of his traditional elements.
Opening up, right.
There were stories about how watching K-pop or K-drama materials in North Korea could have been a very strong offense at one point.
Right. And so if we're seeing those changes on those fronts, I think these are some meaningful changes that we shouldn't underestimate and that we should encourage.
Right. Speaking of the mass games, Juwon, I understand we have a new program set up by Kim Jong-un. It's very different from the ones held in the past.
Yes, Daniel, we don't know what exactly the program, how the program has been renewed, but we know it was introduced again. It was reintroduced on September 9th. That's just a few weeks ago, on the 70th anniversary of the regime's founding. Now this, as you said with Dr. Kim, is a very, it could be a very sensitive performance, as it has a lot of chance that promotes the North Korean regime.
Right, it could be something that is seen as a glorification of what North Korea's previous regime stands for. But I understand there were many changes made to show various economic progress, like using drones during the programs, and various technological aspects were implemented and infused to the performance. Also, less labor-intensive gymnastics, but more fireworks and even a media wall or a flashcard wall that shows President Moon Jae-in on it as well.
Yes, after following the 5-year hiatus, we are expected to see some glowing drones, lasers, and stadium-sized gymnastics shows designed to glorify the country.
Right, and maybe they were watching the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics opening and closing ceremonies, and I believe some of the most memorable bits were the ones involving the drones and the laser shows. Speaking of culture, the sports exchanges, they have been very successful, and they're looking forward to doing more of it. Will we see any bumps along the way in terms of the team-ups? Because some of the teams that's been working with the South Korean athletes exclusively, they're not very open to the idea of sudden changes last minute.
Yeah, so I think early planning here is going to be important. Again, it could be that we have the 2020 Summer Games set up and we might have won the bidding. But if the geopolitical conditions have changed at that point in time, because we're a long way, it's still 2 years we're talking about, but it's still a long way from where we are now, you know, when moving beyond. But again, things can be very unstable. And if it changes very quickly, then it will get in the way of athletes performing. But so planning here is going to be critical. How the two countries coordinate on those fronts will be important. Hopefully things will be okay, and we won't have any sudden changes in the geopolitical environment. So let's see. I'm still unclear, and it's difficult to predict even what's going to happen next month.
Well, North Korea did not have a very stellar track record, but based on if you were to start clean slate from the first day of this year with the declaration, the announcement made by the North Korean leader during his January 1st New Year's speech. It's been consistent so far in terms of not carrying out any provocative actions and working towards turning over a new leaf. Let's take a look at some of the military tensions that's going to be relieved somewhat with the details that's been discussed during the Inter-Korean forming an Inter-Korean Joint Military Committee is a very big, bold highlight among the subjects that were covered.
That's right. The Inter-Korean Joint Military Committee, along with some of the details that are coming out on the side agreement on the military domain from this summit. What I thought was very impressionable for me was the agreement that by November of this year, they will create a arms-free zone at land, air, and sea to lessen the likelihood of accidental engagement, military engagement of some kind between North and South Korea. That means pulling out certain kinds of certain facilities along the DMZ, having a no-fly zone in certain areas, and not having any battleships or naval ships in certain areas at sea. So these are substantively very meaningful measures. They're confidence-building measures because at the same time you're opening up a committee, you're institutionalizing that military-to-military interaction between North and South Korea. So from the government's peace-promoting standpoint, from that point of view, I think this was a very substantial development, and it's one that overall people will look at as a positive thing, not only for South Koreans, but also for foreign investors as well, who have a keen eye on these kinds of issues. They care about provocations and the impact on the markets. So these are very, very good developments overall.
So do you think there's a fresh start in setting up protocol or enhancing consultation prior to any military activity work out in the long run?
Well, we'll have to wait and see how this works out at the working level. But the idea is more substantial. It's more specific than what we've seen in the past. I wouldn't downplay its importance in terms of decreasing military tensions.
Right. We can take the cue from how seriously devoted to the military tension, relieving military tension, the two sides are. We've had a 17-hour marathon working level military discussions before the summit.
That's right.
In terms of a hot air balloon mentioned in the agreements, is it geared towards propaganda leaflets?
Yeah. Well, again, I think anything that reduces any misunderstanding between North and South Korea is a positive thing for reducing tensions. And this goes all under the heading of promoting peace on the peninsula, which, it's interestingly enough, it's being handled separately from the nuclear issue. And is this a signal by the two Koreas that regardless of how the nuclear issue gets handled, that we're going to press ahead with peace-promoting measures? And so nuclear issue is an issue that is going to be outside of what the two Koreas can talk about. It's more an issue that needs to be handled between North Korea and the United States. Or is this an approach that says, let's go with the lower hanging fruits first and address the issue of peace first, and this is the issue, if we could move ahead in a constructive way, then we could tackle the nuclear issue. I don't know what the approach is here, but it certainly is clear to me that these two issues are being looked at from two different points of view, and they're not necessarily the same thing as far as the agreement and the diplomacy is concerned.
Very quickly, before we go, Ji-won, understand fishing or fisheries was a topic that's discussed between the two sides, and it's interesting that the dinner is being held at a particular fish dish-related venue, and NLL is of course a very important topic to be discussed between the two Koreas.
Yes, Daniel, you're very right.
The problem is that North Korea initially, or maybe still, they do not consider the existence, the official existence or the legitimacy of the NLL, right?
Yes, but so what South Korea and North Korea agreed is to take military measures to prevent actions to prevent accidental military clashes and ensure safe fishing activities by turning the area around the northern limit line in the West Sea into a maritime peace zone.
Right, and also a pilot joint fishing zone project is something that they're considering, and yeah, this will be very interesting in the future. It will be very productive in terms of, I guess, revitalizing the industries for the fishermen from up north and down here in the south.
Yes, in fact, they also fully guaranteed the safety of personnel and vessels that entered that will be entering the new maritime peace zone and the pilot joint fishing zone as well.
All right, Ji-won, thank you so much for making time for us today and continuing to contribute your knowledge and experience regarding North Korean affairs. And Dr. James Kim, thank you so much for coming in again and swooping in for the rescue to provide your in-depth analysis of the developments so far from the summit in Pyongyang.
Thanks for having me.
Well, this is where we have to wrap things up. Thank you so much for staying with us. Our coverage of the 2018 Inter-Korean Summit Pyongyang will continue at 8 p.m. Korea time, so we'll see you again then.